Hey everybody, how's it going on this fine day? Let's talk a little bit about the draft. And this video is kind of a continuation of a video that I made a couple months ago. So understand that if you want to get an idea of how I feel about the very top of the draft, just go back a couple months in my video archives. I'll link the video in the description, actually, I think, just so you guys know where we started from. But a couple months ago, when it became relatively clear the Denver Broncos were going to give us, at the very least, a top 10 pick, I talked about the things that the Seahawks could do with that top 10 pick that were not quarterback related. So I talked about the players that made sense for Seattle to target with that top 10 pick, assuming that you decided you didn't want to spend it on a QB, that you liked Geno, or maybe you liked Locke, or you liked somebody else. I don't know. But I wanted to talk about the draft from that angle because early on, especially before the season started, most of our conversations were around quarterback, especially if we knew we were going to get a top pick. We would have been all over CJ Stroud and Will Levis. Now, maybe we still are, but Geno's play this year at least opened up another possibility, and I wanted to visit it. So this video is going to deal with the other first round pick, which we don't know exactly where it's going to fall yet, but at this point, I think we can safely say it's going to fall somewhere between 11 and 24. Either we're going to lose out and end up with a borderline top 10 pick. I don't think it'll get in the top 10, but it'll get close. Or we take care of business, make the playoffs, and then probably lose in round one because our defense is really, really bad. But the point is, we now have a range for that pick. Just like we had a range for the Denver pick a couple months ago, I said somewhere in the top 10. Now, with this Seattle pick, I think we've kind of zeroed in on where the pick is going to fall. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take a look at players that I would make my initial draft target in that range. No quarterbacks, because we've already talked a lot about quarterbacks. You guys know who I like and who I don't like. And honestly, the quarterback discussion is not that interesting right now because, quite frankly, a lot of the guys that I had high hopes for didn't really have great seasons, and I'm just not that interested in it the way that I was at the start of the year when it really looked like this QB class was going to be special. So we're going to focus on non-quarterbacks for the purposes of this video, and within that, we're going to try to figure out what positions should we be targeting with a mid first rounder. So when I talked about the top 10 video, when I talked about the players in the top 10, I basically narrowed it down to the front seven, somebody in the front seven. The other positions just didn't make sense to me, or I didn't think could ever happen. When we widen our range to the late middle first round, the 11 to 24 range, I feel like I'm still largely in that boat, but I want to open up the possibility of one other route. So I'm still saying front seven. I don't think you're going to take a defensive back in the first round. That's not Pete Carroll's style. That's not our style with Pete Carroll. And honestly, we've proven we don't really need to. We can get capable players. We can get great players sometimes past the top 100. So I don't think this team is going to spend a first round pick, even a later first round pick, on a corner, and probably not a safety. So I'm not really going to talk about that. Even though I wouldn't hate it, I don't think we're going to do it. The offense, maybe you start opening up to the offensive line, but I just don't see the right player. There's nothing in this range of the draft that makes sense to me in terms of an interior offensive lineman. I think anything you would do there would be a reach. So I'm not seeing anything there. Obviously, you don't want to tackle because tackle's good. I'm still not seeing the Michael Mayer tight end thing. It doesn't make sense to me. I know we like to use tight ends a lot, but we like to use a lot of tight ends. We don't like to use one tight end a lot. We like to use three different ones that are good. So I don't see how getting a superstar tight end helps us that much. So I don't see that. Running back, maybe, but I just can't get up for it. Maybe Bijan Robinson is worth talking about, but I'm going to jump over that for the moment because it's just not something that personally appeals to me. So the way I see it Once you get down into the middle area of the first round, you start looking at wide receivers. Just because we've seen that our depth is suspect, and honestly, even though Lockett's having one of his best seasons ever, he is starting to get up there, and he's not going to be reliable like this forever. So once you get down into this area of the draft and you have your native pick, whatever pick you're going to end up with from your own record, I think you start looking at the wide receivers position. That's where I would look beyond just the front seven. If there's a superstar guard who pops onto the scene over the next couple of weeks, then I would definitely look at him as well. But for now, I'm looking at defensive line players, edge rushers, and wide receivers. So I've got 6 guys here I want to go over in this video. There are probably going to be a few more that I end up talking about, but this is just where I want to get things started. So let's dive in and quickly go over it. So this first guy is somebody who's kind of blown up onto the scene lately, and the way things are going, he may end up a top 10 pick. In fact, if Denver wins another game, you may end up taking Tyree Wilson with Denver's pick, because this dude is rocketing up draft boards. Tyree Wilson from Texas Tech. He plays some edge in college, but in the NFL, I see him as a 3-4 defensive end, kind of like Myles Murphy. He's 275, 6'6", so he's huge. 23 years old, already a little older than you would like, but he's been very productive over the last 2 years. He's extremely strong. His physical outlook is beautiful. Like, he should be able to just physically dominate in a lot of games. Over the past 2 years, he's got about 100 tackles. He's got 28 tackles for loss and 14 sacks. He's forced a fumble. He's got a pass deflection in 2021. So he's been very productive over the last 2 years for Texas Tech. And this is, I think, maybe what LJ Collier should have been if he was good at football. So Tyree Wilson, because he's so big, because he's so strong, is going to be very appealing to a team looking for a defensive end in a 3-4, which may be what we're looking for. So at the rate we're going, by the time we get to the draft, this guy and Myles Murphy are going to be very close to each other. Right now, his average mock draft position has actually moved up to 7. So honestly, you could flip him and Trenton Simpson in my first video. But that's where I would start. Now we start moving on to guys who are more likely actually going to be in this 11 to 24 range, starting with Jared Verse of Florida State, an edge player, 6'4", 250 pounds, 22 years old, relatively young. He really only has 1 year of production because he transferred to Florida State after 2021. So 2022 is all we have to go on, and it was a good year for him. 41 tackles, 14.5 for a loss, 7.5 sacks, recovered a fumble, and he started the college football year getting projected as like a 3rd-round pick, I think. Now he's pretty much always in the top 25 whenever you see a mock draft get posted. So Jared Verse, probably going to be available in this range. His average mock draft position is 22. Very explosive, great athlete, tremendous ability. The question with Jared Verse is just his understanding of where to be and how to play the game, and that is going to come with time because he just hasn't played a very much high-level football. This was his first year playing for a big-time college. I can't remember the name of the college he was at before Florida State, but it was one of those little places where you don't get good experience against top-level talent. So Jared Verse, he's mostly potential, but he produced well at Florida State for the 1 year he was there. So very interesting prospect there. And then you have Isaiah Foskey, Notre Dame edge player. Interesting note about Foskey, even though he had a really productive year for a good Notre Dame team, his draft stock has generally been dropping throughout this year. I don't totally know why, but I did notice it. 6'4", 257, 22 years old. This guy's more of a finished product than Jared Verse. He had 2 productive years at Notre Dame. Across those 2 years, he had almost 100 tackles, 23 tackles for loss, 20 sacks. He forced 6 fumbles in 2021, which is insane. Right now, his average mock draft position is 24, and that's obviously a little below where Verse is. I personally view Foskey as probably being a better prospect than Verse, but we'll see where we land when the draft actually gets here. Right now, the narrative, I think, is being more pro-verse because he's more explosive. He's a better athlete. Maybe he fits the archetype a little bit better because he's 250, whereas Foskey's almost 260. But I think Isaiah Foskey is going to be a really good pro, really productive pro. I don't know if he has superstar potential, but there's more of a solid base compared to a guy like a Jared Verse. So Isaiah Foskey would definitely be on the table in the middle of the first round, especially if you don't take Will Anderson early. Foskey might be, I don't know if he's the best edge after Anderson, but he's on the table for it. All right, let's switch over to wide receiver here, and there are really three guys. This first guy's probably not going to be available, but if he is, if he falls just a little bit, he might be there at your first pick. It's at least possible. Partially because his college career was not overly productive at TCU. He's only 21, and he's only going to be 21 when he makes his NFL debut, I believe. So the youth helps. But we're talking about a very big-bodied receiver, 6'4", 193 pounds, and he's got 2 years of solid production at TCU. Best year was 2022, 53 catches, 900 yards, and 5 touchdowns, which is not exactly superstar material. But because he's big, because he's tall, because he has the versatility to run a lot of different types of routes, because he's got speed, because he's got quickness, because he should be able to run in a full route tree when he gets to the NFL, he is currently the number one receiver in drafts, consensus pretty much. And as of right now, his average mock draft position is 8. So he may not be there. I'm interested in him if he falls a little bit to that range where you could get him with your middle, maybe slightly upper middle first round pick. So that's probably the number one receiver off the board. He's on my radar, not my favorite, but he should be able to run a full route tree. He just needs to get better at running routes. Next guy, this guy might be a little more my speed, especially in this offense. It's Jordan Addison, the USC receiver. I think he spent 2 years at Pittsburgh where he was actually more productive. 2022, he probably would have had his best year ever if he could have stayed healthy. He didn't, but this is a phenomenal young talent. Only going to be 21 when he makes his NFL debut. He's smaller than Quentin Johnson. He's 6 feet flat, 175 pounds. But you can see the massive production. 2021, he had 100 catches for 1,600 yards, 17 touchdowns, doing a little bit of jet sweep and fly sweep stuff as well. Over his last 3 years in college, he had 20 carries. So he's doing a little bit of that stuff, which we want to be able to do. When the year started, he was the number one receiver in the draft, but Quentin Johnson was able to outstrip him. And it makes sense why. Addison missed a few games, didn't have his most productive year, fell off dramatically from 2021 actually, but I don't put a ton of stock into that. I think that's just kind of the nature of playing in that offense and the nature of missing a couple of games. Addison, very quick, great working after the catch, tremendous yard after the catch guy, somebody who is great at setting plays up before he gets the ball in his hands. That might be the most appealing receiver for the Waldron offense. Current average mock draft position is number 13 overall, so he might be right there at your pick. And final receiver we're going to take a look at in this video, just quick hitters on this guy because he basically didn't play football this year. He has 1 year of real production. It's Jackson Smith-Njigba from Ohio State, another young wide receiver. He's going to be 21 when he makes his NFL debut. Little harder to evaluate this guy because he had a monster 2021 and then 2022 he's been hurt. He's got like 4 catches this year, I think. So he basically didn't play. But what he did in 2021 is so massive, it should get him to the NFL in the first round pretty easily. 95 catches, 1,600 yards, 9 touchdowns. I'm not as crazy about this guy, but I will admit that if he's there and we're picking at like 18 or 19 or 20, that's pretty good value. And there's no denying his ability to run a full route tree. There's no denying his cerebral receiver skills. The question with him is more explosiveness. He doesn't seem like the most explosive receiver. So when you're comparing him to somebody like a Jordan Addison or a Quentin Johnston, I do think you lose something. But he's the guy that I would take a look at if the other 2 receivers are gone at wherever you pick in the middle of the first. And that's it for this initial look at these mid-round guys. Let me know what you guys think. I will see y'all later. Go Hawks.